great courage and great speed. The armed suspect was tackled to the ground by an unarmed officer and was immediately arrested at the scene. The suspect remains in custody. After initial investigations, counter-terrorism policing declared the attack a terrorist incident and are now leading the investigation. Police have confirmed that the threat is contained, but that sadly 3 innocent members of the public were killed, murdered by a sudden and savage knife attacker as they enjoyed a summer evening with friends. Another 3 victims were injured and received hospital treatment. My thoughts and prayers are with the family and friends of everyone who was hurt or killed as a result of this sickening attack. The Victim of Terrorism Unit at the Home Office and family liaison officers are supporting them. And I know honourable members from across the House will join me in sending our heartfelt condolences. Mr. Speaker, it's truly humbling to visit Thames Valley Police this morning. I had the privilege of meeting the officers who first responded to the incident and who were responsible for apprehending the suspect, as well as trying to prevent the loss of further life. These officers, a few of whom were student officers, ran towards danger to help those in need without a second thought. A young unarmed police officer took down the suspect without hesitation, while another performed emergency first aid to those who were injured. These officers are heroes. They showed courage, bravery, and selflessness way beyond their years. They are the very best of us. I would also like to pay tribute to the response of every emergency service that attended the scene, as well as members of the public who stepped in to prevent a further loss of life. Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom has the best security services and police in the world. Since 2017, they have foiled 25 terrorist plots, including 8 driven by right-wing ideologies. They serve the country with professionalism and courage, embodying what the British public rightly expect from those in the front line of the battle against violent extremists and terrorists. The UK's counter-terrorism strategy remains one of the most comprehensive approaches to countering terrorism in the world. But over recent decades, we have all too often seen the results of poisonous extremist ideology. The terrorist threat that we face is complex, diverse, and rapidly changing. It is clear that the threat posed by lone actors is growing. These terrorists are united by the same vile hate that rejects the values that our country holds dear: decency, tolerance, and respect. And we are united in our mission to tackle terrorism in all its forms. Since day one, this government has backed our police and security services, who work around the clock to take down terrorists and violent extremists. On any given day, they make a series of calculated judgments and decisions on how best to protect our citizens and country, based upon the intelligence that they gather. In light of the many complexities across the security, intelligence, and policing communities, in January this year, I announced increased resources for counter-terrorism policing, resulting in a £90 million increase this year alone. This has taken counter-terrorism policing funding to over £900 million, the highest ever. And this is because we live in a complex world, against a backdrop of evolving threats and dynamic threats. Threats that, when they do materialise, are worse than shocking, as they result, as we have seen again this weekend, the tragic loss of life. Bolstering our security and policing network and frontline capability is part of our ambitious programme to strengthen the joint working between the police and security services, to leave terrorists with no place to hide. It is also why we are committed to developing a new Protect duty, so that businesses and owners of public places must take into account the threat of terrorism, and why, following the shocking attacks of Fishmongers Hall and Streatham, we took strong and decisive action. Action which included the introduction of the Terrorist Offenders Restriction of Early Release Act, the emergency legislation which retrospectively ended the automatic early release for terrorist offenders, serving standard determined sentences, forcing them to spend a minimum 2/3 of their time behind bars before being considered for release by a parole board. And through our counter-terrorism and sentencing bill, which enters committee stage in this House this week, we are introducing much tougher penalties for terrorists to keep the public safe. This is the biggest overhaul of terrorist sentencing and monitoring in decades, strengthened every stage of the process, from introducing a 14-year minimum jail term for the most dangerous offenders to stricter monitoring measures. And Jonathan Hall QC is looking at how different agencies, including the police, probation services and security services, investigate, monitor and manage terrorist offenders. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I totally understand the desire for details and information to enter the public domain, particularly at this particular time, as to what happened and why. But as you, Mr. Speaker, has pointed out, I would ask everyone, including the media, to be cautious at this stage about reporting on individuals who have not been charged. We must not do anything that could risk the victims or their loved ones from achieving justice. Mr. Speaker, the first duty of any government is to protect the people it serves. And so we continue to pursue every option available to tackle the terrorist threat and to take dangerous people off our streets. As the Prime Minister reiterated yesterday, the police and security services will continue in their investigations to better understand the circumstances of this tragic incident. And if further action is needed, we will not hesitate. Our world-class CT police and security services have my unequivocal backing as they hunt down hate-fueled terrorists and extremists. So my message today is clear, simple and strong. Swift justice will be done, victims will be supported, and if further action is needed to stop terrorists in their tracks, this government will not hesitate to act. I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary Nick Thomason.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the Home Secretary for advance sight of her statement and her briefing call over the weekend. Like the whole House, I was shocked and appalled by the scenes we saw in Reading on Saturday evening. Whilst doing no more than visit a beautiful park, 3 innocent people were stabbed to death and another 3 seriously injured. Today we remember those who have died, and our thoughts and condolences are with their families and friends at this moment of terrible loss. We send best wishes to those who are injured, wish them a swift recovery, and thank our magnificent NHS staff for the care they are providing. The incident was one of senseless violence, and as always we are indebted to our outstanding police officers and other emergency service personnel for their swift response and work at the scene, helping others by putting themselves in danger. They represent the very best of us. We thank them and the public at the scene who assisted and recognise their courage and their bravery in this most awful of situations. We now know that this has been declared a terrorist incident, and I know that the whole House will support the police as they carry out the highly detailed, careful investigation that is necessary with an incident like this. I hope the Home Secretary can confirm that all necessary resources will be made available to Thames Valley Police and to counter-terrorism policing. I'm sure the Home Secretary will also agree with me that whilst there are quite understandably many questions about this specific case, the best thing to do is to give the police the space they need to conduct the investigation and to establish the facts, and not to indulge in unhelpful speculation. I'd also like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Reading East, for his calm, measured leadership in such a difficult moment. It is heartbreaking that we are having this conversation again, so soon after the terrible attacks at Fishmongers Hall in November that tragically took the lives of Jack Merritt and Saskia Jones, and the attack in Streatham in February. This is a live investigation, as you have said, Mr. Speaker, so we have to ensure there is due process and that the police can do their job. But the country will want answers about these incidents, which have occurred in such quick succession. So whilst the priority today must be to ensure that there are no further related threats and that the victims and families are cared for, it is vital that questions are addressed. I hope the Home Secretary will confirm that she will further update the House on this awful incident and the lessons that need to be learned, but there are some matters I would like her to deal with today. The Home Secretary mentioned the emergency piece of legislation in February, and there is another bill on counter-terrorism going through the House at present with cross-party cooperation, and I hope any further legislation can be on a cross-party basis as well. But does the Home Secretary also agree that legislation alone is not enough? We need a comprehensive look at de-radicalisation in our prisons, how people who pose a threat are risk assessed, and how different agencies can work together to safeguard against tragedies in the future. Community police are the eyes and ears of our society. the intelligence gathering they do is vital. And can the Home Secretary assure me that the Government will never again cut the numbers of community police and will instead build the capacity that's required for law enforcement? Can she also assure me that the Serious Violence Task Force, which has not met since 26th of June last year, will meet soon and on a regular basis? She rightly praised, Mr Speaker, the Intelligence and Security Services, but we know that the Intelligence and Security Committee has not met for over 6 months. Can the Home Secretary confirm when the committee will have all its members in place and exactly when it will meet next? Finally, Mr Speaker, I know there will be many issues in the weeks ahead, but let the message go out from this House today that we stand alongside the wider community in Reading at this dark moment and say that those who have lost their lives will never be forgotten.
Mr Speaker, and I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his comments and his thoughtful remarks in terms of Reading as a community. And following my meeting this morning, I did meet with the member for Reading East and made exactly the same point about working unitedly at a community level, multi-faith with all organisations, because that's really important, not just now, but in terms of going forward, to ensure that people are remembered in the right and appropriate way, but also that we support the community at this difficult time, which is something that we all do. The Right Honourable Gentleman has asked some important questions. He is absolutely right. Legislation is never the only answer or the only solution, not just on issues of this nature, but wider safeguarding, community measures, and the responses that are put in place, which brings me on to community responders, police officers, backing our police, but also resourcing those that keep our communities, people and our country safe. It is right. And in fact, with Thames Valley Police this morning, when I met with the Chief Constable, John Campbell, again, that is a conversation that I had. I was in touch with him over the weekend, and I've had that assurance that they are well supported in terms of the resources that they need. They're dealing with a live investigation. Obviously, this investigation is now a CT investigation, but even so, they have given me that assurance. But there are a number of other things as well, points to make, just on this front too. When it comes to violence of all nature, serious violence, and the Right Honourable Gentleman mentioned Serious Violence Board, we do now, of course, have the National Policing Board, which has effectively taken over that remit. And the National Policing Board has already met several times, even through in recent weeks as well, to discuss not just policing, but crime and the overall crime strategy that the government is taking from a holistic perspective. That also covers the Ministry of Justice side, the end-to-end aspect of the criminal justice system, how offenders are treated. And the Right Honourable Gentleman has also spoken about work that is required around de-radicalisation in prisons and the work that needs to take place, building upon prevent, building upon safeguards that exist already. But these are evolving issues in terms of the type of skills that are needed, the resources obviously that are needed, but the type of techniques that need to be invested in terms of de-radicalisation and prevent work. That is something that is continuous. There is never one solution at all in terms of how to de-radicalise individuals. There are a range of tools, a range of techniques and a range of programmes in place. It is right that we continue to review that and work with that. And of course there is a great deal of work, as the Honourable Gentleman will know, that's taking place around the review of Prevent right now. His final comment and point related to the Security Committee, that of course is taking place in terms of the appointment to the committee, and an announcement will be made in due course as to when that will be coming forward.
I invite the House to join with me in sending our deepest sympathy to the friends and family of James Furlong and to the staff and pupils of the Holt School Woking where he taught. He was, by all accounts, an inspirational teacher who always went the extra distance for his pupils and was a very kind man, and he will be sorely missed. And the community is obviously very shaken today by this news. But will the Home Secretary intensify the efforts of the intelligence services, the police, the border forces and the others? Because we've had too many of these mass murders in recent years, and we want some reassurance that we can get on top of this and save the lives of others for the future.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right, and I too pay tribute to the shocking events that have happened, and pay my respect as well to Mr Furlong for what has happened. Absolutely appalling events and attacks, and all our sympathies and thoughts are with his family and his friends. My right honourable friend is absolutely right in terms of the intensification of the work that is taking place, and of course this is cross-cutting across government, covering a range of measures: police, intelligence, security. The right honourable gentleman also mentioned our borders and the work that we are doing in terms of reviewing our borders, dealing with criminality checks. That is all ongoing work, and it will of course be intensified.
Heading to Scotland with the SNP spokesperson, Kenny McCaskill. Kenny McCaskill.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Can I start by, on behalf of my party, expressing our sorrow at the lives that have tragically been lost, and extending our deepest sympathies to those, their families and friends, and to those who are currently ill and recovering in hospital. It's never easy to lose a loved one, but especially not in these circumstances or at these times. And I echo the Secretary of State's comments regarding our gratitude to those who served and who showed great courage and who will continue to prosecute and investigate. Can I first of all call for a calm response, which I think, to be fair, the Secretary of State has made clear. We have sadly had previous terrorist atrocities. It's a product of our time. We don't expect and shouldn't have to live with it, but we do have to recognise that they do occur. And what we have to recognise is we do have to show calm judgment, not make a rush to an analysis, or indeed make a decision without knowing the full facts. And that has obviously been commented upon yourself regarding it being sub judice. There may very well be mental health or other aspects that we don't know. We wait the outcome of an investigation. But what we can be clear about, and what I would seek to be, again, have the Secretary of State's reassurance, that we make it quite clear that terrorist acts are not perpetrated by communities, they are carried out by individuals. They do not represent any faith, constituency, or indeed cause other than their own misguided and indeed malevolent and wicked views. And we need to take that into account. And we also need to remember that although we have suffered not just this recent tragedy, but all too recent ones, including members very close to this House, what some people basically view as the epicentre of the areas that perpetrate terrorism actually suffer far more from it than we do in our entire history, and we need to take that into account. So on that issue, I would like to ask and seek the reassurance from the Secretary of State that steps will be taken to ensure that reassurance and protection is given to minority communities, because I do know from my own experience in Scotland that there can be those who will rush to judgment and seek to apportion blame, and will, through misguided views or indeed their prejudice and dogma, seek to carry out attacks against minority groups, and therefore would ask that steps, which I no doubt are probably ongoing, are in fact carried out, but equally seek some reassurance that, as well as contest, we will also seek to prevent, that at the end of the day, we do need to not only protect our minority communities, we need to deal with issues that are bubbling under the surface there. So as well as contesting terrorism and confronting it quite rightly, we need to protect communities and address injustice wherever it is.
The honourable gentleman is absolutely right in terms of ensuring that communities not vilified at this particular time, and minority groups in particular and communities. This is actually a moment where we should all be coming together to be supportive across all communities, and in particular, as I discussed earlier on this morning with the Honourable Member for Reading East as well, communities locally, multi-faith groups. So there is so much more work that obviously needs to take place, but there is great work taking place, and we should not lose sight of that right now.
We come to the Member of Parliament, Matt Rodder, whose constituents are affected.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. If you allow me to take a moment, because it's been a very difficult few days. I would also like to thank the Home Secretary for meeting me today, and I very much thought the tone of our discussion was very helpful and positive, and I look forward to working with her and appreciate her offer of support for Reading. Mr Speaker, like many other local people, I was shocked and deeply upset by the dreadful attack in Forbury Gardens. I want to offer my deepest condolences to the families of the 3 people who died. My thoughts are with them. It is impossible to imagine what they're going through at this time. and I'm sure all our hearts go out to them. I'm also thinking about the injured and their loved ones and all those who've been affected by this dreadful attack, which I should emphasise to people took part in a park when people were trying to enjoy a peaceful weekend. Most of all, I would like to also thank the emergency services and the police for their swift and immediate response, and indeed for the incredible bravery shown by some of the officers who, indeed, as it was said earlier, rugby tackled an armed offender and took that person to the ground. Mr. Speaker, Reading is a friendly and peaceful town with a diverse and tolerant community. And this whole incident is completely unknown to us. It's something which has never occurred before in our community, and as such is deeply upsetting. That community solidarity was demonstrated again today when a wide range of different faith and community groups came together to lay flowers at the scene of this dreadful incident, and local people also observed a minute's silence. I'm very proud by the way that our community is pulling together at this difficult time and the way in which local people have been supporting one another. We can and we will come through this difficult time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I pay tribute to the Honourable Gentleman for his comments and his remarks, and as we discussed this morning, I think it's absolutely right, and I think the way in which the community has come together, as we discussed earlier on, with the multi-faith groups, but also with the emergency services and the police officers that both of us have met as well, is absolutely outstanding. Like him, I pay tribute to those friends, family members of those who were hurt or killed, but as ever to the officers, the police officers and the emergency services that responded with such swiftness but with such bravery. And of course we will continue in our discussions in terms of the support that he needs for his constituents at this very difficult time.
Ora Forrest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituency borders Reading, and I speak on behalf of everyone in Newbury in sending my deepest sympathies to the families of the victims, and also I'd like to thank the Thames Valley Police for an exceptional response on Saturday night. No charging decision has been made, but it's true to say that in the last 3 years there have been 5 lone wolf attacks in Streatham, in Fishmongers Hall, on the Parsons Green Tube, on Westminster Bridge, and of course in the Manchester Arena. What reassurances can my right honourable friend give that the counter-terrorism services have sufficiently robust surveillance powers so that they can monitor this most unpredictable of threat?
And raises important questions and points, and of course surveillance is crucial. Surveillance and monitoring of individuals, subjects of interest, in terms of how they are managed and watched within our community. She specifically asked about resources, and that is something I speak to them every week, so we have these discussions. But resourcing is one thing, but it's the access to information and intelligence and how that blends together and how that is combined. So to be specific in answering her questions, they have the resources that they need. There is always more work to do. I'm sure there is more that can be done in the future. And I have already said, Mr. Speaker, in my statement, we need to listen and learn from what has happened. This will evolve over time as this investigation proceeds. And if we need to do more, then of course that's exactly what we'll be doing going forward.
Coming to the Chair of the Select Committee, Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I join with the tributes from all sides of the House to those who have lost their lives in this awful attack, and also to the emergency services who responded so fast. Our thoughts will be with those who've lost loved ones, but also everyone in the community in Reading that will be dealing with the shock and trauma of this, as my honourable friend for Reading East has so powerfully expressed. The Home Secretary will know that this is about the most recent in a series of attacks by lone individuals that are harder for the police and security services to anticipate. But that also emphasises the importance of tackling some of the vile extremism and radicalisation that can lead to attacks, including online, in the community and in prison. Can she confirm that each of these will be included in the government's new counter-extremism strategy, and tell us when she expects to publish that?
I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her question, and in fact she raised a similar point last week as well, and I am actually writing to the Right Honourable Lady outlining the details of what we will be doing with the counter-extremism strategy. She is, however, right to point to online activities, the vile hatred that is spread both online but also on other forms of the web as well, the dark web in particular. There is a great deal of work, and I pay tribute to many of the organisations and individuals, some who we have not even referenced today, that work to close down sites, they work down to track these individuals, and some of the organisations that they're networked with as well. That work will always continue, but of course I will be sharing the details with the Right Honourable Lady shortly.
Chris Loader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the face of great adversity, we often witness the very best of public spirit, selflessness and bravery from our fellow citizens. Those who sacrifice concern of their own safety in the interests of others, and no more so than the first responders during this terrorist attack in Reading, to whom I pay tribute. In the same way that my right honourable friend, the member for Bournemouth East, did so in March 2017, another member of our parliamentary family who, by chance, was at Forbury Gardens on Saturday, ran courageously towards danger, his only focus to help the injured. Mr. Speaker, I would like to pay particular tribute to James Antell, a member of my own staff, who not only used his own shirt to stem the bleeding of one victim, but continued resuscitation on a second victim until the paramedics arrived. This was indeed a remarkable and extraordinary effort from a young man who has been with us in Parliament for a little over 4 months, and whom I am extremely proud to have as part of the West Dorset parliamentary team, as I hope is the whole House.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I join with my honourable friend? A tribute to his assistant and to all other first responders who showed great humility, but also that sense of duty in coming together on Saturday in Forbury Gardens to respond and prevent the further loss of life. As I've already said, Mr. Speaker, they're the very best of all of us, and I pay tribute to everyone that was part of the emergency response, because quite frankly, the resilience that they've shown, the courage that they've shown, the bravery that they've all shown is to be commended.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and coming from the province as I do, we've been subject to many terrorist attacks over the years, and the Home Secretary and others in this House will be aware of that. So on behalf of the Democratic Unionist Party, can I offer my sincere condolences to the families of these victims. We understand your loss and we'll be praying for you in the days ahead. Can the Secretary of State outline what steps government will take to ensure that the families will see justice for their loved ones, but more than this, see lessons learned within the MI5 system to see improvements made? While no one can accurately predict the future, we must ask if we can do better with these persons of interest to prevent in future such travesties of violence.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his comments and for his understanding as well with regards to this particular case. He asked about support for the family. The Home Office is, along with Thames Valley Police as well, providing all the necessary support, particularly through family liaison officers, but also through the Victims of Terrorism Unit at the Home Office. He is right to point to, he refers to one particular agency, but of course there are many other agencies that work across the intelligence and security spectrum. We work with all of them because they're part of that integrated network, along with policing, frontline policing and counter-terrorism policing. That work will continue, as and I've already said, Mr. Speaker, to the House. If there are any issues, any lessons, any lines of inquiry that will need to be followed up, that we can proactively address and deal with, either in this House or through my actions as Home Secretary, that is something that I will absolutely be following up on.
Mr. Speaker, as a Berkshire MP, can I please place on record my personal sympathies to all those affected so gravely in neighbouring Reading. We've seen over the past 24 hours some media speculation about the immigration status of the alleged perpetrator. Could the Home Secretary please reassure me that it remains her priority to return people who come to the UK and who are proven to commit crime?
I thank my right honourable friend for his question. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I will not get into any speculation and commentary, but when it comes to the government's position on foreign national offenders, I could not be any clearer. Our policy is as stated: if you abuse our hospitality and commit crimes in the UK, we will do everything in our power to remove you, and that has been the focus of this government. And I'm also clear that tougher action is needed to speed up removals to deter foreign criminals from entering the UK. So it's not always easy, there are barriers to overcome, and that, of course, Mr. Speaker, is something that we will be looking at through other legislative means.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I, both for myself and for my party, add my voice to the expressions of sympathy for all those whose lives were touched by this dreadful incident, and in particular condolences to all those who mourn the loss of a loved one. Mr. Speaker, 3 months after I was first elected to this House in 2001, we saw the horrific events in New York and Washington on 9/11. That was followed by emergency anti-terror legislation. I struggle to think of a year since where we haven't had anti-terror legislation of some sort, but still the problem continues. I think we can be fairly certain that if the answer to this problem were to be found in a formulation of the law, we would have found it by now. So can I say to the Home Secretary, as she considers the formulation of a new counter-terror and counter-extremism strategy, we need to have the involvement of people who do not have any skin in the game, who in the nicest way possible have been part of the failure that has taken us to this part. And in particular, can that strategy be informed by an honest assessment of what it is going to do to end the radicalisation of those who find themselves within prisons?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My Russian friend is absolutely right in terms of the need for objectivity and understanding in terms of how we formulate these strategies, which are often evolving, they are dynamic, they look at the behaviours of individuals, many of the behaviours that we ourselves simply do not understand. And de-radicalisation is a complicated issue. So he's absolutely right. There are many, and not just specific to what has happened in Reading over the weekend, but more broadly, it is right that we look at the whole approach holistically, understand failures of the past, what has worked in the past, but ensure that we have a comprehensive approach that really builds on constructive insights and learnings. And the Honourable Gentleman is absolutely right in his own assessment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yet another terrorist attack. I join with the Home Secretary in praising the first responders and those individuals that had no concern for their own lives to close this incident down. And I'm pleased to hear the initiatives that are being put forward in our probation service, in our communities, in our prisons. But we need to understand the wider picture that terrorism is increasing. At the time of the Bali bombing, there were 26 prescribed organisations by the Home Office. That number has risen to 86, which you concede that isn't just a problem for the UK, but we need to look wider afield. The reasons why these things are happening is because there are fanatics working in ungoverned spaces, preying on vulnerable individuals, promoting a false interpretation of Islam. We pat ourselves on the back to say we defeated Daesh, but that's only territorially. That ideology lives on and continues to grow. The threat is there. And until we address this wider picture, the threat of terrorism in the UK will continue.
Fred is absolutely right about the threat, the real threat, the present danger of extremist ideologies. And of course, extremist ideologies can be, they manifest in many, many forms. And we all recognise that, and we see that internationally. As I've already said, Mr. Speaker, we see that online, we see that through individuals that are networked. And of course, we cannot tackle these issues on our own. And that is why our work internationally with the Five Eyes communities and many other international partners are so valid. We have to continue to grow the work that we do, learn from each other, grow our own intelligence networks, but importantly, understand the tactics and techniques that can make a difference in this space.
We're going to Scotland with Alan Brown. Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With 30,000 people of interest in security services at any one time, it's obvious they all cannot be under constant surveillance. But in a 7-month period, this is the 4th terrorist attack where the suspect, or potential suspect, was known to authorities. So what lessons can be learned in terms of surveillance and the management of these people known to authorities?
So my honourable friend asks, the honourable gentleman asks, important questions about surveillance techniques, and of course there are always lessons learned about surveillance techniques and how people are monitored. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned in my statement, the intelligence and security services have to make calculated judgments based on the risk of threat, the intelligence, the information that they have, and that is something that they will continue to do. And of course they are constantly reviewing many of their own techniques.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I extend my deepest sympathies to the family and friends of those who lost someone, and also commend the Thames Valley Police and Emergency Services. My constituency is in the Thames Valley and I know how good they are. Does my right honourable friend think that when the police do have the person they think has committed this crime, that the media attention should focus on the victims and not on the beliefs and backstory of the people who perpetrate attacks like this, thereby denying them the attention that they crave?
Well, there is merit in that point that the honourable gentleman makes, of course. It should not be about the spotlight being on the individual, the organisation, those that are purporting terror, hate and fear. We must always be respectful and mindful to the victims, and of course at times like this we have to give the police in particular the time and space that they need to get on with their investigations.
13 is now withdrawn, so we go to Steve Baker. Steve Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask my right honourable friend to give us an update on the progress of the Prevent review, and in particular, will she take steps to make it more effective, and in particular more effective by making sure it's a bit more attractive to the people it's supposed to reach?
My friend is absolutely right. There is work taking place with regards to the Prevent review itself, and there'll be more details forthcoming on that shortly. The fact of the matter is we do need to work harder at a community level to avoid any stigmatisation, but actually to encourage people to engage and participate, but also understand the type of techniques and tactics that will make a difference. And that's something I'll be very happy to discuss further with the honourable gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The person who's been arrested suspected of these offences has been reported as being of interest to the security services as a potential terrorist sympathiser and was released well before the end of his sentence from a prison, a mere 16 days before this murderous rampage took place. There have been newspaper reports of him engaging in alarming behaviour ahead of the incident. So given these serious concerns, can the Home Secretary confirm for me that he was being supervised when he left prison under multi-agency arrangements for public protection, as would seem appropriate, and if so, at what level?
Mr. Speaker, as I've already said, there is an investigation underway in relation to this incident, and it would be thoroughly inappropriate for me to comment any further.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And on behalf of the people of Meriden, I'd like to join the whole House in conveying my condolences to the loved ones of the victims of this heinous attack. And I'd also like to commend the police force and the emergency services who once again who acted heroically and put the safety of others before their own. Does my right honourable friend agree that we can never weaken in our resolve to win this battle against terrorism, and those that seek to divide us will never be allowed to succeed?
My friend is absolutely right, and of course our objective is to ensure that they are never successful and that our values of tolerance and respect prevail. And at a time like this, of course, we support our police, we respect and support our emergency workers, we think about the families of the victims and those that have been hurt, but ultimately our collective role has to be to unite as a country and stand against the type of hate and terrorism that is being purported.
Mr. Speaker, and of course we join all the tributes that have been paid to everyone affected by this terrible attack. It is the third terrorist attack since the UK terror threat level was reduced in November. Is she considering the use of the scale of the terror threat level, and whether there is any consideration of reviewing the criteria and the circumstances around the raising or lowering of the threat level?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The honourable gentleman will know that, of course, that terror threat is independent of the Home Secretary and the Home Office. It's a JTAC assessment. The fact of the matter is the threat level is substantial. And on that basis, we all continue to be vigilant and obviously monitor situations and engage with our intelligence and security services and take the relevant advice.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Derbyshire Dales, I'd like to offer my deep condolences to the family and friends of those who lost their life at the weekend. The terrorist attack that took place over the weekend was a callous and senseless act of terrorism, fuelled apparently by hatred and disdain of our society. Will my right honourable friend agree to commit to looking further at not only the management of these type of individuals, but the laws that underpin their sentences, but also their possible early release and also possible removal from these shores?
Well, my honourable friend has raised a number of issues in terms of the laws that we have, laws that are being discussed in this House of Commons this week in particular with regards to the counter-terrorism and sentencing bill. She is right, of course, we review our laws, update our laws, but at times like this, first and foremost, we have to come together to look at any lessons, any issues, any challenges. It is too early to do that. There is a live investigation on, and it is important, of course, as ever, that we continue to review our legislation, but also the type of tactics and resources that are required at times like this.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, we must always look at what more we can do to prevent such an absolutely horrendous crime. But will she agree with her predecessor as Home Secretary, Lord Howard, that what we need is a measured response and not a knee-jerk reaction? And will she make sure to engage with the Scottish Government and other devolved governments before bringing back any measures that she thinks may be necessary?
The honourable gentleman makes an important point. This is not about knee-jerk reactions at all. Importantly, there is a live police investigation on. It is wrong for anybody to comment or speculate around the individual, but also in terms of what next steps need to be taken. And as ever in this House, when it comes to legislation, reforms or changes, they are all discussed in the right way, not just on the floor of this House, but obviously across parties.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Ashfield stand together and united in grief over this cowardly attack on innocent individuals. We are a peaceful and tolerant nation with a proud record of welcoming refugees and asylum seekers, the vast majority of whom have come to the UK and contributed positively to society, like the men I used to work with down the pits in the 80s. These were displaced people at the end of World War II. They had no country, no home to go to, and we gave them a home, and in return they grafted down the pits to raise good, decent families and made our country a better place. However, there is something wrong if an individual has come into this country illegally and been granted asylum and then goes on to be a security risk. Could my right honourable friend please tell me what steps her department will be taking to ensure we do not have another instance of a potential terrorist slipping through the net of the security services?
Well, my right honourable friend makes some important points about the contribution of those refugees in particular who come to our country because they're being persecuted elsewhere, and we rightly give them a home and they establish their lives in our country. We are a free, open, tolerant country, and as Mr. Speaker, I've said before on the floor of the House, I think we're one of the greatest countries in the world, and when it comes to giving people the freedom to succeed and get on and live their lives, we offer that opportunity. I'm not going to comment on anything to do with the individual. There is a live investigation, but I do want to reiterate, of course, that when it comes to offenders, foreign national offenders in particular, this government is absolutely clear in terms of the approach that we are taking to speed up the removal of individuals. Within the law, there are complexities naturally in some cases, in fact many cases, but that's why we are seeking through measures that were outlined, Mr. Speaker, in the Queen's speech earlier on this year, and we will continue with our policies and legislation going forward.
Scotland with Owen Thompson. Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Words can't express the horror of an attack such as this, and I'd certainly add my condolences to the families and friends of all the victims. It has been reported that the intelligence services believe mental health was an issue in this incident. Now, can the Home Secretary comment further on what further support could be offered to individuals who may be known to mental health services, especially where there's an interest from intelligence services?
Speaker, again, I will not comment on the investigation and the individuals and reports in the newspapers. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, the Solicitor General has also issued warnings to the media this afternoon on that, so that there is nobody prejudicing the case, which is absolutely vital. But of course, the Honourable Gentleman makes an important point about individuals that are known. Of course, those individuals, many of whom, if they are, as we've already has already been raised on the floor of the House this afternoon, if they are in prison, if they're known to probation services, there is work that takes place through probation services, through MAPA, through various risk assessments around the individuals. Of course, that will continue, and of course, the MOJ are constantly reviewing not just their own policies but practices, and that is very much standard along with all the individuals who need bespoke support, not just now but throughout their own development, whether they're inside or prison or when they're released from prison.
That's right, Garner.
My thoughts, and along with my Wilden constituents, are with the victims and their families, and we pay tribute to the brave police who ran towards danger. Mr. Speaker, whilst on the Home Affairs Select Committee we tackled radicalisation and the tipping point, does my right honourable friend agree with me that there are two rules that apply, regardless if you are a far-right extremist or an Islamist extremist? The conscious role of social media companies that spread propaganda and groom, and also the importance of community projects such as Prevent.
My friend is absolutely right in terms of the role of network providers, but effectively programmes like Prevent as well. There is much more that we can do, and of course there is work that's underway constantly.
Into Scotland again with Neil Gray. Neil Gray.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My heart breaks, as I know it does for my constituents across Airdrie and Shotts, for those who've lost their lives and their families and loved ones, and I echo the sentiments that have already been expressed. And following on from that previous question, it would be wrong to speculate on motive, but can the Home Secretary update the House in more detail what she's doing to break up online grooming campaigns to prevent young people, young individuals from being radicalised?
Mr. Speaker, there is a great deal of work that's taking place on this particular issue that the Honourable Gentleman has raised. I'm very happy, in the interest of time, to write to him and outline more of that.
Speaker, whilst the police and security services continue in their vital work to track down and prevent lone actors tempted to carry out an attack, does my right honourable friend agree that there is no community in the UK that even tacitly condones an outrage such as this, that the perpetrators are typically loners, misfits, mentally unstable and socially inadequate, in no way representative of any community view?
Makes important points. He's right that these individuals do not represent any community or a community view.
Wendy Chandler.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In January of this year, the Government said it would follow through in conducting a review of its Prevent strategy. However, 6 months on, there is still no chair for the review committee, and although I understand that the deadline for applications was extended due to COVID, the applications closed today, the progress of this review must be priority. Can the Secretary of State update the House on when they expect to appoint a reviewer and when they plan to conclude the review, given the expectation was that the committee would report in August?
I will do so in due course, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Lady is absolutely right. The deadline has been extended. I think it is actually today is the closing date. So in due course that information will be shared.
Heading to Harlow with Robert Holfen. Robert Holfen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that most of these awful tragedies tend to be in cities, and this one was in a town, has my right honourable friend made an assessment of terrorist activities in towns across the United Kingdom, and will she do everything possible to support Essex Police in the work they do to keep Harlow Town safe from crime and from terrorism?
Right honourable friend is absolutely right. Assessments of this nature take place constantly through our security and intelligence services and also with our police forces. And my right honourable friend will naturally know that I will also do everything that I can to ensure that our brilliant police officers in Essex and our great Chief Constable BJ Harrington is also supported both for Harlow Town in resources, but obviously across the whole county of Essex.
Turn to Scotland again with Margaret Farray. Margaret Farray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I join honourable members across the House in sending my condolences to the families of those who were killed in this horrendous attack. The Home Secretary has recognised that terrorists are increasingly acting alone, and we need to do everything we can to protect communities from this growing threat. What assurances can she give that the Home Office is adapting its counter-terrorism response to the use of low-tech weapons by terrorists acting in isolation?
Point out to the low sophistication of many of these lone actors. There is constant work, and it's not just in the Home Office. It is based on intelligence, working with our partners, working with agencies, and of course that informs our collective approach, the strategies that we develop with our partner organisations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the measures my right honourable friend has introduced since she took office. But time and again my constituents contact me and say we read of these individuals who pose a threat to our values, our democracy and the safety of our citizens, and yet we still allow them into the country and we do not remove them. Can I add the support of myself and my constituents to the appeals earlier to remove more of these people, and will she redouble her efforts to achieve that?
So, Mr. Speaker, to my honourable friend's question is absolutely yes. I've already pointed to some of the legislation that will be forthcoming, and that work will obviously be accelerated.
Heading to Martin Day in Linlithgow. Martin Day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful to the Secretary of State for her statement today and would wish to extend my condolences and sympathy to everyone affected by this appalling attack. The PREVENT strategy is a key element of the counter-terrorism strategy. However, the intended review has been impacted by the reviewer stepping down over concerns of impartiality. Can the Secretary of State inform what lessons regarding this appointment have been learned, and when will the next reviewer be in place?
Speaker, as I've already said to the House this afternoon, recruitment process is underway. The deadline closes today. More information will be forthcoming once that reviewer has been appointed. And of course, it's important that there's an objective process around that. That is something that I completely support.
Michael Lumley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The right to life is the greatest right of all, and I know my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is doing everything she can to protect British citizens under current legal frameworks. Could my right honourable friend confirm how Brexit will enable our government to better protect our citizens from future potential terrorists whom we may not be allowed to deport or detain under current transnational legal obligations?
And points to some important changes that will be forthcoming, including further and greater criminality checks at our borders through our future borders and immigration work, through our points-based system, and many of the changes that we'll be bringing forward. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, this also touches upon the Foreign National Offenders Bill, as mentioned and highlighted in the humble address earlier on this year. These are important pieces of legislation that will signal to major changes when it comes to Britain's post-Brexit and how we will keep our country safe, our citizens safe, but also have greater control of our borders.
David Linden.
Thank you very much. Today clearly is a day for us to be thinking of the families affected and to thank those officers who ran there on Saturday night. But the Home Secretary said repeatedly that lessons will have to be learned from this, and an element of that means scrutiny. So can the Home Secretary tell us when the Intelligence and Security Select Committee will be reconvening? Because I understand it's not reconvened since the election last year. So can the Home Secretary put that on record, please?
So, Mr. Speaker, is that I understand that the appointments of the committee are underway, and when that selection has been completed, all members of the House will be notified through the usual channels.
Priti Patel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend has announced an additional £90 million for counter-terrorism policing. Can she reassure me that that money will be ring-fenced?
I can absolutely say, Mr. Speaker, that money is that was the increase for this year alone, which has taken funding for counter-terrorism policing to £900 million. We have other reforms underway, other initiatives underway when it comes to counter-terrorism policing. But I think, if I may, Mr. Speaker, it's important to reflect that, of course, counter-terrorism policing do not work on their own. They're part of the wider UK policing family and network. They are plugged into our intelligence services and our community. And that integrated approach is absolutely vital when it comes to keeping our people, the citizens of our country, our communities and our country safe.
Going to Motherwell with Margaret Fellows. Mariam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a day when we come together to absolutely show our abhorrence at these terrible, terrible deeds. And can I give my sympathies to all concerned who have been so badly affected. Mr. Speaker, in 2015, the then Justice Secretary Michael Gove asked Ian Aitchison, a former prison governor, to review how extremism was being handled. Mr. Aitchison concluded that the system was full of flaws. What steps has the Home Secretary taken to address the concerns outlined in this report?
The Aitchison review, the report itself, made various recommendations, and that is something that I, along with the Lord Chancellor and across government, we are constantly reviewing and working on. And if I may, Mr. Speaker, I've already mentioned the PREVENT strategy, the work that's taking place on counter-extremism. We must look at all of this collectively and together, rather than creating strategies in isolation.
Heading to South Derbyshire with Heather Wheeler. Heather Wheeler.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Further to my honourable friend from Kensington's question about the £90 million, on behalf of the residents of South Derbyshire, can I ask my right honourable friend that it is a matter of a key priority that her department will be cracking down on terrorist atrocities going forward?
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and of course we do this collectively, not in isolation, working with our police, counter-terrorism policing family across the country, but also with our security and intelligence networks. We base everything on their work, the threats, the judgments that they make, and these resources, the £900 million for counter-terrorism policing, are absolutely vital on top of the funding and resources for our intelligence and security networks, and of course that is what effectively keeps our nation safe, as we've seen through the number of threats that they've foiled.
Patricia Gibson.
Mr. Speaker, and I wish to echo very much the condolences that have been expressed across this House today. The UK only recently began operating so-called separation units for the highest risk detainees in prison, but we know that concerns have been expressed across the prison service about whether or not these separation units are being properly used. Can the Home Secretary update the House today on how many of these separation units are indeed in use across the prison estate in the UK, and if they are being used effectively?
In response to the Honourable Lady's question on the specifics, I will consult the Ministry of Justice, who will know the details of this, and we will happily ask them to write to the Honourable Lady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Out of the blue, and with no intelligence prior information, 3 terrorists once came to my house to kill me. They were stopped by my 11-year-old son Alexander in the front garden when they asked him, was his daddy home? I was home, but he felt something was wrong. By good luck and chance, they then got into their car and disappeared and killed someone else. But luck for me, not for them. My point, my right honourable friend, is this. It is almost impossible for the police and the security services to identify people like this who decide on their own, with a knife, to go out and do great harm. That's true. But can I ask my right honourable friend to commend bystanders and policemen who, with huge courage, tackle these people and bring them down and stop far more other innocents being killed?
Well, my friend is absolutely right, and Mr. Speaker, we saw this at the weekend with the police officer, unarmed police officer, who apprehended the suspect, the individual, and we've seen this in many other cases. And at times like this, we know that individuals like this are the very best of us, and they would have done a great deal to keep other people protected and out of danger.
37 withdrawn, so we go to Gareth Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Speaker, yet again we have a terrorist attack that was aimed at the wholly innocent. This was an act of pure hatred. So does the Home Secretary agree with me that this highlights the difficulties that the security forces have to contend with when trying to monitor 30 to 40,000 people who at any stage could decide to attack people? The challenges they face are absolutely huge, and so therefore we should be swift to support them rather than swift to judge them.
Is absolutely right, and the work that they do, the work that they undertake is vast, it's complicated, and obviously is also based upon intelligence at home and sometimes abroad as well. So we must all reflect upon the way in which they work. Of course, they make difficult decisions and judgments based upon information that they have. I commend them in every single way for the work that they do, and that I pay tribute to them for the way in which they work.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My thoughts and condolences are with the victims, their friends and family. I take the point about a media report, so be careful what I say, but I will ask one quite direct question. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that our legal system has become a roadblock preventing the elected governments of the day from being able to take decisions on the basis of what's in the best interests of a law-abiding majority, both by inhibiting our ability to deal with illegal immigration and to support those we know to pose a risk to our country?
Mr. Speaker, I've spoken previously on the floor of the House about the complexities when it comes to immigration, the immigration system, immigration law, but also I've already touched on the difficulty with deporting foreign national offenders. There are many challenges in the system. We intend to overcome them, and we will intend to reform the system in any way that we can.
Sarah Britley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd firstly like to send my condolences to the family and friends of those who have lost their loved ones in this terrible attack. It's a duty of this government to do everything in their power to prevent families from ever having to go through what these families will be going through now. So does the Secretary of State agree that action must now be taken to strengthen public confidence in the criminal justice system, and that terrorist offenders should spend more time in prisons to match the severity of their crimes?
The Honourable Lady speaks for the silent majority across our country on this particular point, and she's right, and we are right in our assessment that those who offend, the highest harm offenders, should be in prison and in prison for longer. That is the purpose of the Counter-Terrorism and Sentencing Bill. We are very clear in that, and of course that is under debate this week as it goes into committee in this House.
In order to allow the safe exit of honourable members participating in this item of business and the safe arrival of those participating in the next, I'm suspending the House for 3 minutes